I was mid-rant, which is where I usually start my mornings now that I own a home in a development governed by the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. You know, those places where they call themselves a community, but what they really mean is, we paid too much for our houses and now we're going to enforce arbitrary rules to justify our existence. I was ripping open the third notice this month. I swear, the paper they use for these violation notices is thicker than the Constitution. It's some ultra-heavy linen blend stock that screams, "This is serious. Your trivial problem is our lifeblood." The title, in a pristine, soulless black font, read, "Formal Cure or Remedy Notice. Cure or Remedy." Like I was hosting a medieval plague outbreak on my property. I smoothed the page out on my kitchen counter, which was perfectly granite, perfectly compliant, and perfectly boring. The grievance? It was printed right there, bolded, underlined, and surrounded by enough white space to make a minimalist feel overwhelmed. Violation. Driveway apron. Surface degraded. Section 4.b, subclause junction. The details below were pure poetry, the kind of prose only a truly idle mind could produce. Failed to maintain aesthetic continuity with surrounding pavement, presenting a non-compliant surface degradation. Hairline fracture extending 17 inches longitudinally from the western curb interface. Non-remediation within the 14-day grace period will result in escalating monetary penalties and potential forfeiture of communal amenities privileges. I let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a choke. 17 inches longitudinally. It was a crack, people. A tiny spiderweb sliver in the concrete apron where my driveway meets the street. It was barely wide enough to catch a rogue blade of grass. You needed to be on your hands and knees, probably wearing reading glasses and using a high-powered flashlight to even notice it. Which is exactly how Mrs. Henderson must have found it. Mrs. Henderson lives directly across the street, and she is the self-appointed queen of curbside compliance. Her house is a fortress of beige perfection. Her lawn looks less like just grass and more like a finely woven emerald green shag carpet. Her shrubbery? It's cut into perfect cubes, as if geometry itself demanded conformity. She doesn't walk, she power glides, wearing pristine white tennis shoes and a constant expression of thinly veiled disapproval. Her mission in life is to ensure that my property, which has a distinct lived-in charm, read minor disorder, does not contaminate the perfect suburban equilibrium she has painstakingly achieved. She didn't just initiate the complaint. She probably stood there with a ruler, timing device, and a protractor, measuring that fracture for maximum impact. I had half a mind to just ignore it, but the thought of losing my communal amenities privileges, meaning no access to the pool where I sometimes go to nap on a deck, chair, was enough to propel me to action. But not sensible action, oh no. That ship sailed when they used the word degradation. I grabbed my phone and paced. I needed backup, or maybe just an audience for my rage. Maria, my friend from college, picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me, Leo. You sound like you just found a tax audit in your cereal box." "Worse, Maria. Much, much worse. The HOA has declared war on my driveway." "The crack?" she asked, already sounding exhausted. She'd heard this saga before. "Did they send you another one of those fancy certificates of non-compliance?" They called it a non-compliant surface degradation. Degradation, Maria. That's a term for historical erosion or moral collapse, not a piece of sidewalk. I could fix it with a tube of superglue and a prayer, but that's not the point. The point is the tone. I read her the offending sentence, the longitudinally part. Maria sighed, a professional, exasperated friend sigh. Look, Leo, just seal it up. The $50 kit from Home Depot. You're overthinking this. Go buy the gray gunk, smear it in, and the war is over. You win by being boringly compliant. Overthinking? Maria, this is war. They called my concrete a blight. Blight. That's a term for potato famine, not a minor fissure in a utility easement. I have 2 weeks before they start hitting me with fines the size of a small car payment. And if I just smear gray gunk in it, they win. They win because I let them dictate my aesthetic choices based on their oppressive vision of uniformity. Leo, your aesthetic choices involve leaving your Christmas lights up until March. They're winter lights, Maria, and that's besides the point. If they want me to fix it, I'm going to fix it so aggressively they won't even remember what standard gray concrete looks like. They want me to address the integrity of the surface? Fine. I will address it. With flair, with personality, with structural honesty. I was pacing faster now, working myself into a frenzy of spite-driven creativity. I'm thinking I don't just fill the crack. I'm thinking the concrete is fundamentally flawed. It needs a total overhaul, but not a nice one, not a smooth gray one. That's what they expect. Maria hesitated. What's the alternative, Leo? Are you going to pave it in diamonds? No. That's too expensive and too classy. It needs to be offensive, but technically compliant. It needs to look like a terrible accident, but be functionally superior. It needs to be a middle finger that the city code inspector can't legally cite. You're scaring me, Leo. Good. I'm scaring myself, I admitted, a slow, terrible smile spreading across my face. I looked out the window. Mrs. Henderson was on her driveway, spraying down a tiny spot of dust that had dared to land on her perfect pavement. The sight sealed the deal. I'm not paying for structural dazzle right away. That's Plan B. Plan A is cheaper, faster, and much, much funnier. Which is? I'm going to hire the absolute cheapest, fastest, most incompetent contractor I can find to attempt a compliant repair. I need something so tragically messed up that the HOA will be begging me to just replace the whole damn thing. And when they do, I'll tell them no. I'll tell them the mess is the repair. The failure is the foundation of my masterpiece. Maria just laughed, but it was the nervous kind. You're doing this just to spite Mrs. Henderson, aren't you? No, I said, looking right at her immaculate beige mansion. I'm doing this for the soul of my concrete. It deserves better than a simple, boring, gray death. The initial idea, hire the cheapest, fastest crew to ensure maximum incompetence. I pulled up my browser and typed in the most generic, suspiciously enthusiastic search terms I could think of. The first result, promising same-day service and suspiciously low prices, was Tony's Tough Concrete. We finish fast. I hit the call button. The first step toward the beautiful, glittering chaos had been taken. Tony showed up exactly 30 minutes later, driving a truck that looked like it had been constructed entirely from spare parts and wishful thinking. The door was a different color from the cab, and the back was piled high with what appeared to be bags of cement, 5-gallon buckets of mystery fluids, and a rusty shovel, all held together by a single, frayed bungee cord. He was exactly who I'd hoped he would be. Tony looked like he was auditioning for a role as a construction-themed wrestler. He was built like a cinder block and wore a sleeveless denim shirt that featured at least 3 visible stains that defied classification. He had a deep, gravelly voice and spoke about concrete like it was a sensitive, living organism that needed emotional support. I just needed him to fill a 17-inch line. Leo, my man, Tony's Tough Concrete, at your service. Where's the tragedy? He boomed, surveying my modest driveway apron as if it were the site of an ancient civilization's collapse. It's right here, Tony. The 17-inch hairline fracture. Longitudinally, I said, pointing to the barely visible line. Tony squinted, bending down with an audible groan, and ran a calloused finger over the crack. He straightened up, shaking his head dramatically. See, Leo, this ain't just a crack. This is a structural trauma. It's weeping. It's a symptom of a deeper systemic issue, man. The aggregate is screaming for help. You let this go. You're talking total pavement failure inside 6 months. You gotta show the concrete who's boss, but with respect, you know? I just need it sealed, Tony. Something quick, cheap, and code-compliant. I don't need an exorcism for the foundation. He ignored me, pulling out a small notepad covered in illegible scribbles and what looked like dried motor oil. Now, for a structural trauma of this magnitude, we can't just go with the patch and pray method. You need a full resurface and micro-aggregate infusion. We use my proprietary blend, Tony's Titan Blend, with quartz dust and a synthetic polymer. We're talking $3,000, but you'll never see another crack in your lifetime. Guaranteed. $3,000. To fix a crack I could hide with a quarter. Tony, I appreciate the enthusiasm for the Titan Blend, but I'm really just looking for the patch and pray method. I'm thinking the $150 special. You know, whatever you've got on the truck right now that sets fast and looks repaired. His face fell. Oh man, the $150 special. That's the quick set shame. We just use the standard calcium silicate mix. It'll stop the leak, but the aesthetics, Leo, the aesthetic continuity. He threw my HOA's own jargon back at me, and I had to suppress a laugh. He really was perfect. Aesthetic continuity is not my concern, Tony. Functional compliance is. I need it fixed, and I need it fixed today. Can you do that quick set shame for a flat $200 all in? Cash. The magic word worked. Tony's eyes lit up. $200? Done. But you gotta sign a liability waiver stating that you chose the quick set shame, despite my professional recommendation for the Titan Blend, TM. Where do I sign? 10 minutes later, Tony was in my driveway, wrestling a huge, dented metal bucket out of his truck. His crew consisted of one skinny kid named Ricky, who looked terrified of both Tony and the bucket. The disaster unfolded with beautiful, chaotic efficiency. First, the noise. Tony started up a cement mixer that sounded less like machinery and more like a dying elephant gargling gravel. It was so loud that Mrs. Henderson actually backed away from her hose, clutching her pearls, a sight that brought a small measure of warmth to my cold, spiteful heart. Second, the mix. Tony didn't measure anything. He just dumped the gray powder into the mixer, added water from my hose until it looked soupy. And then, in a move that terrified me, he grabbed a random, smaller bucket from his truck and poured in a sticky, viscous, reddish fluid. "What's that, Tony?" I called out over the racket. "Oh, that? That's the chromatic quickset. Just speeds up the drying time. Saves me a trip back tomorrow, my man. Don't worry, it'll cure to a perfectly off-white adjacent shade. Trust the process." The mixture pouring out of the mixer and into the crack was not off-white adjacent. It was not even gray. It was a shocking, pulsating neon purple. It looked like Barney the dinosaur had bled onto my driveway. Tony and Ricky troweled it into the crack with the practiced speed of people who knew they were doing a terrible job but needed to move on to the next job before anyone could complain. The finish was uneven, lumpy, and textured, like dried Play-Doh after a 6-year-old was done with. It looked less like a professional repair and more like a massive, poorly applied bandage that had gotten infected. Within 20 minutes, they were done. Tony wiped his hands on his already filthy shirt and held out his own illegible receipt. $200, Leo. That crack ain't going nowhere. Now the aesthetic continuity. That's on you, brother. That purple patina is structural, man. It adds texture. I stared at the driveway. The purple patch was a foot wide in places, covering maybe 2 feet of the original 17-inch crack. It was truly, aggressively ugly. It was an aesthetic offense that dwarfed the original hairline fracture. This was far worse than I had hoped. "Tony," I said, trying to keep the hysteria out of my voice. "It looks like you fixed a piece of chewing gum with a tub of wet sand. And it's neon purple." "Nah, man, it's the chromatic quickset. It'll cure, I told ya. It'll be off-white adjacent by Tuesday. You're just seeing the initial polymer crystallization phase." "The crystallization phase makes it look like a cartoon wound? Tony, you've made it worse. I'm firing you. This is unacceptable. I won't pay you $200 for this structural purple disgrace." Tony's face, previously a mask of cheerful confidence, crumpled into an expression of theatrical betrayal. "Fired? But I finished the job. I applied the quickset. I fulfilled the contract. We had an agreement, man. The $200, I need that for the ambiance disruption fee, by the way. My crew and we bring a certain vibe to the neighborhood, and that ain't cheap." "Ambiance disruption fee? Tony, you created a concrete atrocity. The only ambiance you disrupted was the peaceful, boring grayness that my HOA expects. Look at it. It violates every rule they have." "But it fixed the crack, Leo. Functionally, it's solid. That's all you asked for. You waived the aesthetic warranty. That's in the fine print." He pointed to the scribble on his receipt that looked like a drunk spider had walked across the paper. I gave up. Arguing with Tony was like arguing with a cement mixer. He had an answer for everything, and every answer involved more absurd jargon. I pulled out 4 $50 bills and shoved them into his hand. "Get out, Tony. Just go, and never darken my driveway with your chromatic quickset again." He pocketed the cash, suddenly cheerful again. "Pleasure doing business, Leo. Call me when you realize the Titan Blend TM is the future. Trust the process." And just like that, Tony and Ricky were gone, leaving behind a scarred, ugly, highly conspicuous purple patch that was now far, far worse than the original crack. I stared at the abomination. I had 2 weeks before the fine hit, and now Mrs. Henderson had not 1, but 2 aesthetic violations to report: the original crack and the purple attempt at remediation. I had failed step 1, but failure, I realized, was just the foundation for true spite. I walked back inside, grabbing a beer. I looked at the purple patch, glinting aggressively in the afternoon sun. It was an eyesore. It was non-compliant. It was a structural lie. And then I remembered Maria's joke. "Are you going to pave it in diamonds?" I walked back out, kneeling down next to the purple mess. I touched the uneven surface. It was tacky but hard. "If they want texture," I muttered to the offending patch. A brilliant, terrible idea taking root in my brain. "They'll get sparkle. They want compliance? I'll make this entire thing the strongest, most structurally sound and ugliest piece of art in the entire development." The Mosaic idea surfaced. A brilliant, terrible solution born of desperation, spite, and the pure, concentrated fury that only a petty HOA can inspire. I was going to turn this failure into a victory. I was going to turn this patch into a glittering, neighborhood-defining act of defiance. The purple was just the undercoat. The first step in my transformation from frustrated homeowner to nocturnal sidewalk artist was Naturally, a highly suspicious supply run. It's amazing what happens when you combine spite with unlimited access to craft store inventory. I hit the local Hobby Lobby light and a discount hardware warehouse like I was preparing for the apocalypse, or maybe just a very enthusiastic Mardi Gras parade. My haul was glorious and terrifying. 1. Colored glass vase fillers. Not just clear, but bags of iridescent, cobalt blue, emerald green, and fire engine red pebbles. The kind of stuff they put in fish tanks or under fancy candles. I bought 9 bags. 2. Iridescent aquarium gravel for texture contrast. You need variety in your structural dazzle. 3. Heavy-duty marine-grade epoxy, not the tiny tubes. I bought 2 huge gallons of the industrial stuff. This wasn't going to be temporary. This concrete patch was going to survive a direct nuclear strike. 4. Cheap, bright blue food coloring. For the grout. I decided the gray-purple base wasn't enough. The sealant needed to make a statement. The theme: oceanic chaos. 5. 3 old glass bottles for the shattered aggregate effect. I needed some sharp, authentic shards mixed in with the smooth pebbles. Art requires sacrifice. The cashier, a very confused, elderly woman named Mildred, was ringing me up. She kept glancing from the gallons of industrial epoxy to the 9 bags of shimmering blue glass. My, she said, peering over her half-moon glasses. Quite the haul, dear. Getting ready for a big wedding centerpiece? I leaned in conspiratorially. Even better, ma'am. I'm building a monument. Oh? A garden gnome pedestal? I straightened up, adopting my most pompous high art voice. Not quite. This is a postmodern site-specific work of concrete deconstruction, ma'am. It speaks to the fragility of the suburban dream, the ephemeral nature of property value, and the oppressive uniformity enforced by local humanis. Governance. I am remediating a structural deficiency through the aggressive application of shattered aggregate surface treatment. Mildred just nodded slowly, her eyes wide. Well, I hope you have a strong back for all that deconstruction, son. That epoxy smells something terrible. The smell is structural, ma'am. It's part of the sensory experience. I paid and left before she could ask if I needed a coupon for the glitter. The night of the glue was a blur of paranoid, sticky effort. I waited until 11:30 p.m., after Mrs. Henderson's light, the one she keeps on 24/7 to monitor my activities, had finally dimmed. I set up my operation under the cloak of night, using 2 cheap LED headlamps that made me look like a desperate archaeologist unearthing the world's most garish ruin. I started by prepping the surface, scraping off the loosest bits of Tony's purple shame. Then came the epoxy. The description must be sensory. The sticky chemical smell of the marine-grade epoxy was overwhelming, like 100 plastic boats melting at once. It clung to the night air. I mixed the 2 parts, added the bright blue food coloring, and watched as the liquid sealant turned a beautiful, toxic shade of electric cerulean. Using a tiny trowel and an old spatula, I started filling the cracks and the patchy purple area. Then, the careful, painstaking work of embedding the glass began. I was out there, on my hands and knees, pushing tiny shards of turquoise glass, iridescent green flakes, and shattered red bottle pieces into the hardening, sticky blue gunk. I was focused, manic, and possessed by a singular, spite-fueled vision. Each piece of glass was a tiny, glittering act of rebellion. There's one for the aesthetic continuity. Presses in a sapphire blue pebble. There's one for the non-compliant surface degradation. Pushes in a sharp piece of red bottle glass. And this one, Mrs. Henderson, is for your perfectly manicured, geometrically cubed shrubs. Smashes a piece of amber glass and presses the jagged shards into the epoxy. The aching realization of how much effort spite requires hit me around 1:00 a.m. My back screamed, my knees were stiff, and my hands were permanently coated in a tacky chemical residue. I was sweating profusely in the cool night air. I heard a dog bark a few doors down, and I actually ducked behind my truck, like I was committing a felony. Which, let's be honest, in this neighborhood, fixing your own property with excessive color probably was. I managed to cover the entire original crack area and the surrounding 2 square feet of Tony's purple disaster before the epoxy started setting too fast to work. I wiped my hands on my jeans, stood back, and surveyed the damage. The headlights caught the fresh section. It wasn't concrete anymore. It was a solid, non-porous, structurally sound piece of pavement art. It glittered, it shined, and it was deeply, violently blue and multicolored. I stumbled inside, exhausted but victorious, and passed out. The inevitable confrontation came at 7:00 a.m., precisely when Mrs. Henderson starts her morning power walk. I was standing on my porch with a large, steaming mug of coffee, waiting. I wasn't just waiting. I was staging the reveal. Mrs. Henderson appeared around the corner, pristine white tennis shoes crunching silently on the sidewalk. She rounded my mailbox, and then she stopped. It was glorious. Her power glide instantly became a rigid statue pose. She focused on the newly installed Mosaic, which was now fully cured and catching the bright morning sun, throwing off dozens of tiny, dazzling rainbow reflections. Her face, usually a picture of stoic, controlled displeasure, contorted into pure, unadulterated horror. She took 3 slow, deliberate steps closer, leaned in, and squinted at the surface. Mrs. Henderson, eyes narrowed, voice dangerously low, clipped and venomous. "Leo, what is that?" Leo, taking a long, cheerful sip of coffee. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson. Beautiful day for a constitutional, isn't it?" Henderson. "That's not what I asked. I asked what that is. The thing on your driveway apron. Is that glitter?" Leo. "Glitter? Heavens no. Glitter is aesthetically transient. This, ma'am, is reclaimed microaggregate, set in a proprietary polymer matrix. It's structurally sound, non-slip, and frankly dazzling. You'll note I've perfectly remediated the surface degradation cited in your recent communication." Henderson. "You've defaced the surface. You've put trash into the concrete. The sun coming off this is a public hazard. It's blinding." Leo. "Ah, you're experiencing the peace. Excellent. We're calling it The Phoenix Rises from the Utility Easement." It's a statement on the revitalization of mundane suburban infrastructure. A little something to appreciate on your constitutional. It's technically a repair, by the way, stronger than before. I used marine-grade epoxy. It's built to withstand a hurricane. She stood there, speechless, vibrating with suppressed fury. She was already reaching for the phone in her white running jacket. I knew she was calling the HOA manager immediately. I just smiled, took another sip of coffee, and headed back inside. The game was on. The call came around noon, right as I was contemplating extending the Mosaic further down the walkway. Spite is a powerful motivator, but unfortunately my adrenaline levels were peaking right when my stomach was demanding a sandwich. It wasn't the HOA manager. It was the police. "Mr. Davis, this is Officer Ramirez, Metro PD. We received a complaint regarding vandalism and potential public hazard at your residence. Can you step outside, please?" My heart did a quick, frantic tap dance, but I immediately put on my most innocent, friendly voice. "Of course, officer. I'd be happy to discuss my legally compliant home improvements." I walked outside. Officer Ramirez was young, maybe 25, and already looked profoundly weary, as if he'd spent the last hour mediating a catfight between two hedgehogs. He was staring at the mosaic with a look of utter professional bewilderment. Mrs. Henderson was, of course, standing on her porch, pretending to water a potted plant while clearly observing every detail of the confrontation. Her posture was triumphant. Officer Ramirez, adjusting his belt, trying to maintain composure. "Sir, the complaint states you have affixed sharp, non-approved materials to the public-facing sidewalk. Allegations include defacing public property and vandalism." Leo, calm and authoritative, pointing to the mosaic. "Officer, let's be clear. I have done neither. This is a property repair, legally mandated by the HOA due to a pre-existing structural flaw. I received a notice citing non-compliant surface degradation. My response was to fix the flaw." Ramirez. With iridescent glass and blue epoxy?" Leo. "Precisely. Since standard repair failed, and I have receipts from the contractor, Tony's Tough Concrete, who left a massive purple eyesore, see Exhibit A, I implemented a proprietary surface treatment. The HOA rules state I must use structurally sound materials to remediate damage. I used marine-grade epoxy, rated for structural repairs, and shattered aggregate, which is commonly used in high-traffic pavement. It is completely sealed, non-protruding, and functionally superior to standard concrete." Ramirez pulled out his ticket book, flipping through pages of municipal codes. He looked confused. Ramirez. "Sir, the city ordinance is pretty clear on pavement standards. Section 14, Subclause G. Public right-of-way surfaces shall maintain a uniform, uncolored cement appearance, free of foreign objects." Leo. But officer, my driveway apron is not the public right-of-way sidewalk. It's an easement, a transition zone, and critically, it's covered by my HOA's maintenance responsibilities, which I am fulfilling. And more importantly, this is a repair of the original violation. When you repair something, you're exempt from the uncolored appearance standard if the material is deemed structurally necessary to complete the repair. This is structurally necessary dazzle. Ramirez sighed, rubbing his temples. Structural dazzle. I gotta write that down. Look, I'm not a pavement expert, but it looks like glass. Doesn't that constitute a public hazard? What if a child falls? Leo. Officer, look closer. I challenge you to run your hand over it. Go ahead. Ramirez hesitated, then cautiously ran the tip of his gloved finger over the surface. Ramirez. It's smooth. It's hard. Leo. It's sealed, non-porous, and perfectly flat. It's safer than the original cracked concrete, which was a trip hazard cited by the HOA. I solved their problem. Show me the ordinance that bans structural dazzle, or the one that defines marine-grade epoxy as vandalism. The dialogue focused on the minutiae of municipal code. Leo kept stressing that he was repairing the concrete, just with artistic license. Ramirez was clearly frustrated trying to find a clear, chargeable offense that distinguished repaired concrete from unlicensed public artwork. Ramirez. The complaint also cites disturbing the peace. All that noise late last night. Is that true? Leo. I was conducting a necessary structural repair under deadline to avoid a massive HOA fine. I worked until 1 o'clock a.m. I had to use specialized equipment, a trowel and a spatula, and the noise was minimal. Was it louder than Mrs. Henderson's power washer at 7 o'clock a.m.? Highly debatable. That woman can strip paint off a barn door with that thing. Mrs. Henderson, hearing her name, turned and sprayed a patch of already damp soil with aggressive conviction. Ramirez looked over at her, then back at me. He was clearly caught between a bored homeowner and an overzealous neighbor. Ramirez. Mr. Davis, I could potentially cite you for illegal dumping of materials, that glass, or disturbing the peace due to the late hour. But I'm going to be honest. I think this is a civil matter. This is a dispute about color, not crime. The property integrity is currently reinforced. Leo. Thank you, officer. My concrete appreciates the validation. Ramirez. However, he said, pointing a finger at the current edge of the mosaic, you are to cease and desist any further expansion of the dazzle field until this entire matter is resolved with your homeowners association. Do not expand it onto the city-maintained sidewalk, or I will be back, and I will cite you for everything I can find. Leo. Understood, officer. No further expansion. I will limit my structural art to my private property boundary. Ramirez stuffed his ticket book back in his vest, shaking his head. I've dealt with dog barking, loud music, and a dispute over a garden flamingo. This is a new one, Mr. Davis. Get this sorted out. He climbed back into his patrol car and drove off slowly, probably calling his supervisor for guidance on the structural dazzle classification. Leo's internal triumph was immense. He didn't get arrested. He almost felt a rush of adrenaline. He had successfully deflected the police by pivoting the entire conversation back to the HOA's original complaint. The city cop was forced to admit it was a civil matter. I immediately planned to work faster. I had 2 days before the hearing. I had to finish the driveway border before the HOA could send the city inspector, the real enemy. The rest of the driveway border needed to shine. I raced inside to grab the remaining glass. The next 48 hours were a marathon of focused, spite-driven labor. I was running on caffeine and the pure, concentrated joy of impending bureaucratic failure. I finished the entire visible driveway apron and the first 10 feet of the walkway leading to my front door. The full reveal was something to behold. The concrete was gone. It had been replaced by a shimmering, multicolored expanse. It was gaudy, sun-catching, and undeniably robust. The sapphire blues blended with the emerald greens, with tiny veins of the shocking red glass weaving through them. The deep blue grout, now fully cured, provided a dramatic, oceanic contrast to the glittering jewels. It looked less like cracked concrete and more like a disco ball had a tragic, artistic accident in a marine biology lab. It was structurally sound. It was sealed. It was functionally perfect. It was also the most aesthetically disruptive piece of property in a 50-mile radius. The neighborhood's reaction was immediate and divided. While I was applying the final sealant coat, a protective, high-gloss layer that made the glass pop, I got drive-by comments. A giant contractor truck rumbled by, slowing down. The driver, A burly guy in a high-vis vest yelled out the window, "That's genius, man! You just invented a new type of pavement. Seriously, what is that?" A few minutes later, a mother pushing a stroller stopped. She didn't complain. She just took out her phone. "Mother, is this art? My daughter loves it. It's like a rainbow." Leo, "It's performance art, ma'am. Specifically, structural compliance through aggressive aesthetics." The teenager who usually skateboards past my house paused, took a quick video, and sped off yelling, "Best sidewalk in the world, dude." Mrs. Henderson, however, was past the point of subtle observation. She simply stood on her porch, holding her phone, clearly having a lengthy, hushed, and dramatic conversation. The escalation was complete. She had called in the big guns. The final showdown arrived on Wednesday morning. I knew it was coming when I saw a procession of expensive, mid-sized sedans rolling slowly down the street. Mrs. Henderson was already waiting on the sidewalk, positioned directly in front of my gleaming Mosaic. She wasn't alone. She was flanked by two men, an HOA board member named Mr. Jenkins, a pale man with a nervous tie knot, and a municipal code inspector named Mr. Patel. Mr. Patel was the key. He looked tired. He looked like a man who just wanted to check the box for a fence height violation and go home. Instead, he was facing the Mona Lisa of spite. Mrs. Henderson, launching immediately into her prepared attack, voice ringing with theatrical accusation. "Mr. Patel? Mr. Jenkins, thank you for coming. You see it, don't you? I told you. This is beyond the pale. This is a flagrant, malicious act of vandalism designed to circumvent the bylaws." Mr. Davis was issued a notice for a simple crack. His response? He has permanently defaced his property with shards of glass and electric blue grout. This is an absolute eyesore. It violates every community standard we have. It is ruining property values. You need to issue a removal order immediately. Mr. Jenkins, the HOA board member, just nodded weakly, terrified of both Mrs. Henderson and my driveway. Leo, stepping out calmly, holding a single sheet of paper, the artist's statement. "Good morning, gentlemen. Mrs. Henderson, always a pleasure. Mr. Patel, let me save you some time. What you are looking at is the final stage of a code-mandated repair." Henderson. "Repair? It's a disco floor." Leo. "It is a sealed, non-porous surface utilizing industrial-grade polymer and shattered aggregate for enhanced structural integrity. I refer to it professionally as shattered aggregate surface remediation. Here, Mr. Patel, is the official artist's statement and technical compliance report." I handed Mr. Patel the ridiculous handwritten sheet. It was titled, "The Aesthetics of Necessity, a Remediation Manifesto. Patel, Henderson Exhibit B." Mr. Patel, sighing, taking the paper, looking at the title. "Mr. Davis, please, just tell me how this is compliant." Leo's defense. "Certainly. The original HOA complaint cited non-compliant surface degradation. Degradation means failure to maintain structural integrity. This surface is now 100% structurally sound, rated for heavier loads than standard concrete, and is completely waterproof. The city code, as I understand it, requires pavement to be structurally sound, non-protruding, and free of trip hazards. Is any of the glass sticking up?" Mr. Patel bent down, inspecting the mosaic closely, running his hand over it like Officer Ramirez had. Patel. "No, it's flat. It's sealed tight." Leo. "Correct. It is functionally superior." Now, the aesthetic part. The HOA standards require uniform color and texture. But the moment the HOA issued a repair notice, the project transitioned from a compliance issue to a remediation effort. You cannot legally require a remedial material to perfectly match the original flawed material. If I fixed a white fence with a structurally necessary carbon fiber patch, it wouldn't have to be white. It just has to be fixed. The law prioritizes function over form when dealing with a structural repair, Henderson. Furious. That is a preposterous interpretation. You are deliberately using a loophole. Leo. Which code, ma'am? The one against having boring property? I replaced a structural deficiency with a solid, sealed, non-porous surface. It's functionally superior. You asked for a fix. This is the fix. It is literally too beautiful to be a hazard, and legally, Mr. Patel, you have no grounds to cite me for the material, only its functionality. Mr. Patel turned away from Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Jenkins, giving me a long, hard look. He was clearly an honest man caught in a terrible web of suburban pettiness. He pulled out his massive, well-thumbed binder of municipal codes. He flipped pages furiously, occasionally muttering to himself. All right, I've looked at Section 14.G, the aesthetic standard. I've reviewed the HOA's original notice for surface degradation, and I've looked at the city's standard on remedial construction. He closed the binder with a heavy thump that echoed in the quiet street. Mrs. Henderson held her breath. Mrs. Henderson, your HOA requires him to fix the structural degradation. He has done so. The material, while unorthodox, is non-hazardous, sealed, and structurally sound. It is a remedial repair. The city code does not specifically ban epoxy set aggregate in a residential driveway apron. Furthermore, the aesthetic continuity clause, Mr. Patel looked directly at, his face grim, does not apply to remedial work performed to correct an already cited structural fault. He paused, letting the silence hang. Mr. Jenkins looked faint. In short, Mrs. Henderson, the Mosaic is an absolute eyesore, Mr. Patel stated flatly. It is in terrible taste. It violates the spirit of your guidelines. However, it technically complies with the letter of the law regarding structural integrity. I have no legal authority to demand its removal. The complaint is dismissed. The look on Mrs. Henderson's face was priceless. It was a perfect blend of defeat, outrage, and dawning realization that Leo had weaponized municipal code against her. The sound Mrs. Henderson made next was a strangled gasp, followed by a noise like a tea kettle boiling over. She didn't say another word. She spun on her heel, leaving Mr. Jenkins stammering and Mr. Patel looking relieved that the ordeal was finally over. She slammed her front door shut with a finality that suggested she might never open it again. Mr. Jenkins just wrung his hands. Well, Leo, we'll be reviewing the bylaws. Section 4.B, subclause Shen will definitely be getting an amendment. I look forward to the Leo amendment, Mr. Jenkins, I said, beaming. Have a structurally sound day. Mr. Patel gave me a tired nod, thanked me for the technical compliance report, and quickly drove off. I was left victorious, exhausted, and staring at my glittering, permanent statement piece. I grabbed my phone for the final, celebratory call with Maria. Maria, answering the phone with a burst of laughter. I heard you caused a diplomatic incident. My neighbor saw the cop car. What happened? Leo. I won, Maria. The city inspector ruled in my favor. Functionally compliant, aesthetically offensive, and legally untouchable. The HOA is defeated, at least until they can convene an emergency session to write an ordinance specifically banning shattered aggregate surface remediation. Maria: You know they're going to update the bylaws just because of you, right? You've ruined uniformity for a whole community. Leo: Let them. That'll be the Leo Amendment. I'm practically a footnote in municipal law now. I consider it a public service. I showed them that bureaucracy is a two-edged sword. It cuts both ways, especially when one side is fueled by pure, industrial-grade spite. I hung up, looking at the Mosaic one last time. The humor in the whole situation was sharp. The concrete was probably cheaper to replace entirely than the gallons of epoxy, bags of glass, and the amount of Advil and emotional labor I'd spent on this ridiculous crusade. But the satisfaction was priceless. Now I have a steady stream of neighbors. Some, the secretly rebellious ones, pull me aside and ask me how I did it, wanting to copy the idea on their mailbox posts or flower bed borders. Others, usually retirees, just stop to complain, calling it tacky and an insult to the neighborhood. I just tell them to file a formal complaint. They never do. They know they can't beat the Leo Amendment. I now suggest starting a side hustle called Artistic Code Compliance. They complained my concrete was cracked, so I turned it into a mosaic with colored glass. And if that's not the most American solution to a petty problem, escalate the conflict until you achieve absurd, glittery victory, I don't know what is. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think my soul needs a sealant coat.